Renovated this, in a sense, new sanctuary. I thought that over the next 3 weeks leading up to Rally Sunday is that we do a little bit of a study in Scripture on the places where God dwells or has dwelt. And today we're going to take a look at the story of the tabernacle. Next week we're going to take a look at the story of the temple, David's dream of building God a temple. And then on the final Sunday, we're going to take a look at how that even transposed into the early church and an understanding of what that is even for us as Christians. But there's always going to be application in all of those messages. So today we're going to take, as I said, looking at the tabernacle. Next week we're going to take a look at the temple. And then also later on. And part of it is also, what does it mean not only to be those who dwell in this place, what is it that God is doing in this place, but also what it is to have God dwelling within us. So that is the theme over the next several weeks. So before we begin, let's bow in a word of prayer. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. We thank you for who you are and for your faithfulness to us. We ask and pray that indeed we have open hearts to receive you once again. In the name of Christ we pray, by the power of the Spirit. Amen. Over this past week, I noticed that there was a channel, and every once in a while you'll see this, where it was showing the Indiana Jones Raiders of the Lost Ark series. And they go back to back. And if you have the time, you can watch all the movies back to back. And as you know, the Raiders of the Lost Ark starred who? Anybody? Harrison Ford, yeah. It was actually, now here's a question that I'm going to ask you too. Anybody know what year the first Raiders of the Lost Ark came out? Wow. 1981. I was talking to Samantha before the service, and she said, Pastor Ian, that's ancient history. I said, yeah, I know. I was 17 years old at the time when Raiders first came out. And many of you, maybe even here, were born in 1981 when this epic series sort of started and began. And it really tells the story of an archaeologist, Indiana Jones, who is on a quest to find a powerful ancient Jewish relic. Anybody remember from the movie, if you watched it, what was that relic? The Ark of the Covenant, yeah. And many of you know that, but even in our culture today, there will be those who would say, well, the Ark of the Covenant, well, it's part of the movie, but where does that really come from? What is the story that is associated with even in the Bible? Well, as we know, even there, Indiana was trying to find this ancient Jewish relic because he knew that there was the plot, of course, is that there are those who want to use the presence of God and for their own evil purposes and for their own devices and desires. There is a line in the movie where Indiana Jones says to somebody this. He says, you want to talk to God? Well, let's go find him together. Let's say that together. You want to talk to God? Let's go find him together. And so it brings up, in many ways, to my own mind, a good question. Where do we find God? Where does God dwell? Where does God dwell? Now, our culture might even be more familiar with the story of Indiana Jones, but as those who gathered here this morning, we need to be familiar with another story, and you know that story, I think. That's the story of the Exodus. That's the story that we've heard read to us partially this morning from the book of Exodus. The question for them and for the ancient Israelites is, indeed, where does God dwell? Where does this God, this Yahweh God, want to dwell? And why is it so important that God dwell, that we know that God is dwelling with us? Well, as I said, the story of the tabernacle, in fact, begins to unfold along with the ark, along with the flight from Exodus, from Egypt, at the beginning of the book of Exodus. You remember how it begins. After Joseph, after a time of prosperity, after a time when Israel was doing well in the land of Egypt, there arose pharaohs. And these pharaohs did not know Moses, and they did not know Joseph, and they did not know the people of Israel. And for 400 years, the people of Israel were enslaved. And during that time, what they did was, and during that enslavement, they just prayed out to God. They asked for deliverance. They were asking for freedom. And their question was this: is God listening? Yahweh God, do you care about us in this circumstance? Are you really, truly with us in this? And the Bible says this. It says this: God heard, God remembered, God saw, and God knew. You can say that with me. God heard, God remembered, God saw, and God knew. Specifically, it says this, that God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And what was that covenant? Well, that was a blessing. That was a promise made to Abraham that he would be the father. He and Sarah would be the father of many nations. You will be my people, and I will be your God. You will be the father of many nations, and I am going to give you a promised land. In other words, this promise, at the heart of this covenant that was given by God to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, was, I am truly and I am really with you. And so as we know, the story begins and it just continues on. And it's there where God raises up another leader and another deliverer. And that person's name is Moses. And Moses spends some time in Egypt, but then he goes out into the wilderness, and it's there where he meets this God in a burning bush, a bush that is not consumed. And it's at that bush where Moses, the Lord basically tells Moses two things. He says this to Moses: I will be with you, and I am who I am. I will be with you, and I am who I am. And with that confidence, even though Moses at times questioned even God's purposes in that, with that, Moses goes back to Egypt, and he goes with one unshakable and unalterable message. And we know that message. What is that message? Let my people go. But there's even more to that message, and sometimes we just stop there. In fact, here is the full message. Let my people go, that they may go out into the wilderness and worship and serve me. You see, it wasn't from God's perspective simply about delivering the people from their enslavement and from their oppression. The Lord's end game was always to bring them to himself. Indeed, he had compassion on them. He loved them. He cared for them. He chose them. In fact, he acted in the face of injustice, but it was more than this. There was a sense from his heart that indeed it was freeing them from that slavery and that oppression, but it was also to bring them to himself, that I may dwell with them. Amen? That I may dwell with them. And so we know the story moves on, and there's this dramatic showdown between Pharaoh and Moses, between the Egyptian priests and Moses, and the 10 plagues, and then there's the Passover, and then there's the lamb's blood on the porticos of the Israelites' homes. And then finally, as we know, the story begins, and there's freedom. There is deliverance. They're able to leave Egypt. And they begin their journey to the promised land. And so they move through the Red Sea and they move into the wilderness. And to this point, God begins and keeps his promises with them. I will be your God, and you will be my people, and I will be with you. But here's the question. In many ways, here's the problem. Think about it. How does a holy God, immortal, invisible, Yahweh God, dwell with mere mortals? How does eternity step into time? How does a God who is holy and pure engage our broken humanity? How does God redeem our sinful ways? But very simply, how does this God dwell with humanity? In some ways, it's not humanity's problem. It was not the people of Israel's problem. It was something that God was working out within himself. How can I dwell with this people? How can they know who I am? Well, at first, as we know, the Lord reveals his presence and leads them and guides them through a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. And he begins to lead the Israelites, as I said, to the promised land. And for a while it works, until the Israelites reach the holy mountain. And it is then when the Israelites come to this mountain, and you know the story, there's only one person who is allowed to go up and to ascend into the mountain. And who is that? Moses. The rest of the people, in fact, are required to stay below the mountain. No one else is able to draw near. Even Moses, you recall, has to come before God, and he has to take his sandals off in the presence even of the burning bush, in the presence of glory, in the presence of a holy God. There's a bit of humor even in this too. At one point, Moses even asks to see God's face, and then God sort of chuckled and said, "You can't handle my face, but maybe I'll let you see my backside." And it's then when Moses, in fact, sees the glory of God, and even his own appearance is transformed. But there's this idea that Moses was the only one who could ascend into the holy mountain. And this is what it actually says in Exodus chapter 24, verses 15 and 17. It says this: "Then Moses went up on the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain. The glory of the Lord dwelt on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it for 6 days. And on the seventh day he called Moses out of the midst of the cloud. Now the appearance of the glory of the Lord was like a devouring fire on top of the mountain in the sight of all the people of Israel." How does this God, Yahweh God, dwell with mere mortals? How does this God draw near to those whom he wants to live in relationship with, whom he wants to redeem, whom he wants to know how much they are cared for and loved? How does this God, and here I'm going to move into the understanding of the tabernacle, how does this God pitch his tent in our midst? In many ways, that was the purpose of Moses' ascent even onto the holy mountain. And we know, sometimes when we remember that story, we think, well, Moses went up into the mountain to receive, what? The Ten Commandments, the Decalogue. But I want you to, here's a little bit of homework for you later on, and I hope it's exciting, but I go leave this place, and I want you to read this part of Exodus, because it's not only